I didn't realize my family would choose my child as the punishment until I saw fear settle into his eyes, the kind of fear that doesn't scream or cry, the kind that goes quiet and learns fast. They say family protects you, but that night I learned family can also be the courtroom, the jury, and the executioner, all sitting in the same living room pretending this is for your own good. My son was standing behind me when they started, small hands clutching my shirt, not understanding the words, but understanding the tone, the tension, the way adults lean forward when they want control. They didn't raise their voices at first, they never do. They believe real power whispers, real punishment is calm, organized and wrapped in logic so clean it almost sounds reasonable. They told me I was ungrateful, that I had forgotten where I came from, that I needed to be taught a lesson before I ruined everything they had built. And when I argued back, when I refused to bow my head, they looked past me. That was the moment I felt it, the shift, the silence, the decision being made without words, eyes moving away from me and landing on my child like he was an object, like he was leverage. I remember thinking surely they wouldn't cross that line. Surely blood means something. Surely no one would hurt a child just to break an adult. But that thought died the second my mother said his name. My son looked up at me, confused, trusting, waiting for me to fix it. And that was when I realized the lesson wasn't meant for him. It was meant for me, delivered through the person I loved most. They didn't touch him yet. They didn't need to. Fear was already doing the work. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and every adult there knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't anger, this was strategy. Punishment designed to leave no bruises, no witnesses, no proof, only memories that replay at night when the house is quiet and guilt gets loud. I wanted to scream, to grab my son and run. But fear froze me in place because they knew something about me. They knew I would break before I let him suffer, and they planned to use that. By the time I understood what was happening, the lesson had already begun, and my child was standing in the center of a war he never chose, just because I refused to obey. If you think this story is about cruelty, you're wrong. This is about control, about how love can be twisted into a weapon sharp enough to scar generations. They started small. That's how these things always begin. Nothing that looks cruel from the outside, nothing that could be explained easily if someone asked questions later. They said he needed discipline, structure, limits, words that sound responsible when spoken by adults who know exactly how to hide their intentions behind concern. My son was told to sit quietly in the corner, not as punishment, they said, but as reflection. They wanted him to think, to learn, to understand why his parent had disappointed everyone. He kept looking at me, not crying, not angry, just searching my face for permission to breathe normally again. And every time our eyes met, my family watched closely. They wanted to see if I would break, if I would apologize, if I would finally say the words they were waiting for, because they knew the fastest way to control me was through him. When I refused, when I stayed silent, they escalated without raising their voices. Dinner was served without calling him. Conversations happened around him like he wasn't there. He wasn't yelled at, he wasn't hit, he was erased. And that kind of punishment cuts deeper than anything loud. My mother said children learn quickly when consequences are clear. My father nodded. My siblings avoided my eyes. And my son sat there absorbing a lesson none of them would ever admit out loud. He learned that love can disappear without warning, that safety is conditional, that silence is safer than speaking, and that adults decide your worth long before you understand what worth even means. At night, he asked me if he had done something wrong, his voice calm but fragile, like he was already preparing himself to accept the answer, no matter how much it hurt. I told him no, and the lie tasted bitter because the truth was worse. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply useful. They reminded me constantly that this could all stop, that peace was just one apology away, one promise of obedience, one admission that I was the problem. And every time I hesitated, every time I chose my dignity over surrender, My son paid for it in ways that left no marks but changed him anyway. He stopped asking questions, stopped laughing loudly, stopped reaching for people first, and I watched my child shrink in real time, while my family called it growth. That was when I realized this wasn't discipline, this was conditioning, and they were training both of us. By the end of that week, my son had learned how to disappear in a room full of people, and I had learned how far my family was willing to go. And they were nowhere near finished. By the second week, fear stopped feeling loud and started feeling normal. That's how I knew something inside our home had shifted permanently. My son no longer asked why things were happening. He didn't even look surprised anymore. It was like his body had learned the pattern faster than his mind. He learned where to sit without being told, when to speak without permission, and most painfully, when not to exist at all. My family praised this change. They said he was finally learning manners, learning respect, learning how to behave properly, and every compliment they gave him felt like a knife aimed straight at me. They reminded me constantly how peaceful things were now, how calm the house felt when everyone knew their place, how much better life was without unnecessary resistance. I started noticing the smallest details, the way my son flinched when someone raised their voice even slightly, the way he checked my face before reacting to anything, the way he apologized for things that weren't mistakes. He wasn't afraid of punishment anymore. He was afraid of disappointing people who had already proven they could turn love on and off like a switch. One afternoon, I caught him quietly putting away a toy he loved, not because anyone told him to, but because he thought enjoying something might cause trouble. That moment shattered something in me, because I realized he was no longer responding to rules. He was responding to fear. I confronted my family carefully, choosing my words like stepping through glass. I told them this wasn't healthy, that he was changing, that something was wrong. They laughed softly, not cruelly, just enough to make me feel foolish. They told me I was overreacting, that children adapt, that I should be grateful they were helping me raise him properly. They said I was projecting my own guilt onto an innocent situation, that my anxiety was the real problem, and that if I truly loved my child, I would stop creating tension. That's when I understood the second layer of control. They weren't just punishing my child, they were rewriting reality. Every concern I raised became proof of my instability. Every objection became evidence that I couldn't be trusted to make decisions. Meanwhile, my son continued disappearing piece by piece, becoming quieter, smaller, easier to manage, exactly the way they wanted. At night, I lay awake listening to his breathing, counting each rise and fall of his chest, terrified that one day he would stop needing me altogether. Because fear teaches independence faster than love ever could. And deep down I knew the longer this continued, the harder it would be to undo, not just for him, but for me. They had succeeded in making fear routine, and once fear feels normal, escape starts to feel dangerous. The moment everything broke did not arrive with shouting or chaos. It arrived quietly, the way permanent damage usually does. My son came to me one night holding a piece of paper. It was a note he had written himself, an apology for being difficult, for causing problems, for making the adults angry, and for being the reason I was unhappy. He told me he thought if he learned to behave better, everyone would smile again, and maybe then I would stop looking so tired. That was the moment I understood what my family had actually accomplished. They hadn't just punished my child, they had taught him that love must be earned through silence and self-erasure. I confronted them one last time, not carefully this time, not politely. I told them they were destroying him, that this had gone too far, that it needed to stop immediately. They didn't deny it, they didn't apologize, they simply told me this was the consequence of my choices, that children are resilient, and that pain teaches lessons faster than kindness ever could. They said if I wanted it to end, I knew exactly what to do: apologize, obey, fall back in line, and everything would go back to normal. But normal no longer existed. I looked at my son standing behind me, holding his apology like a shield. And I realized something terrifying. Even if I obeyed now, the damage was already done. Fear had already settled into his bones. Silence had already become his safety, and no promise from my family could undo what they had taught him about love. That night I made a decision that cost me everything. I chose my child, and by doing that, I lost my family, my support, my inheritance, and every relationship that came with obedience. We left quietly, without drama, without goodbyes, and without the version of ourselves that believed family always means protection. Years later, my son asked me a question I still don't know how to answer. He asked why I waited so long, why I let it happen at all. I didn't tell him the truth, that fear can make you freeze, that control works best when it feels normal, and that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you're taught never to question. They wanted to teach me a lesson, and they succeeded. They taught me that love without safety is not love, that obedience is not respect, and that punishment disguised as care can destroy a child long before anyone notices. My family punished my child to teach me a lesson, and I will carry that lesson for the rest of my life. Was this discipline, or was this abuse disguised as tradition? Tell me honestly. If protecting your child meant losing your family, would you still walk away? Or would fear keep you silent? At what point does obedience stop being respect and start becoming cruelty? Where do you draw the line? Do you think a parent should ever allow a child to suffer just to keep peace with family, yes or no? If you were the child in this story, do you think you would forgive the parent or never forget? Have you ever stayed quiet to protect someone you loved and later realized that silence caused more harm? Is family still family when love becomes conditional? Or does blood stop mattering at that point? Do you believe fear teaches discipline, or does it only teach children how to disappear? Who failed more in this story, the family who punished the child, or the parent who waited too long? If this story made you uncomfortable, ask yourself why, and then tell me in the comments.